It seems unlikely, but sometimes we forget that humans are primates. For a long time, we got used to seeing the natural world as something hostile, as an obstacle to overcome in order to progress. The centuries and the control we took over the planet separated us from the natural home that we share with all kinds of animals and plants. Although the times of living in trees are far away, it is enough to look into the eyes of other primates to recognize much of us in them. Look at their hands, almost identical to ours, and their enormous intelligence to remember that they are our family. Unfortunately, human-driven climate change is destroying the planet, our home, and millions of other species. Change is not only the only way to save the Earth, but the biggest challenge we have ever faced.
People are always saying to me, well, you can change young people's minds, but not older people. And that's not true. You can change older people's minds. And very often I tell people the way to do it is to tell stories. You reach the heart. Don't try fighting with the head, which is set in its ways and knows best, but creep in under the guard into the heart, and you find people change.
Jane Goodall is perhaps the world's most famous ethologist and environmentalist. For more than 60 years, she has studied chimpanzees and has worked on environmental conservation. Her dream since she was a child was to live among animals, and today, at 88 years old, her legacy is not only love for nature, but also working hard to make this planet a better place. My name is Nicolás Ibargüen. I'm a journalist, environmentalist, and nature lover. But above all, I am someone who is convinced that we must change the relationship we have with our only home, planet Earth. The first time I saw Jane Goodall was in a restaurant in Washington. I was eating with some friends, and in the middle of the talk, as a wonderful coincidence, I saw that she was right there. Jane was with some people that I didn't identify at first glance, because all I was thinking about was how to go to talk to her. What was I going to do when she got up from the table? While I was thinking that, she got up, and I immediately walked through the restaurant. I was so excited to meet her that I completely ignored the people next to her, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Not everyone is fortunate enough to meet their heroes, but I had it that day in a small restaurant in Washington. The best thing was Jane's kindness when I greeted her. That day was the first of several we have shared together over 12 years. Jane, thank you so much. So let's start. You were this little girl in England that loved animals. You just had this dream of going to Africa and work with animals. And then suddenly you became one of the most famous scientists and conservationists in the world. And you didn't follow a traditional path at all. So how did that happen?
So I grew up from the age of 5 in the house where I am now. This is where I've been, locked down because of the pandemic. So I grew up here, the garden outside.
Same house?
Same house. This is a family house. I'm here with my sister and her family. Very lucky to be locked down here. I nearly was locked down in Abu Dhabi, for example. So anyway, I always loved animals, and I had an amazing and supportive mother. And she didn't get mad when she found I'd taken lots of earthworms to bed with me. She didn't get mad, although she'd actually called the police thinking I was lost. And I was waiting for her to see where on earth an egg that big came out of the hen, because I couldn't see that hole. And I just went on watching all the animals around me, and no TV when I was growing up. It was just books. And World War II was raging too. But anyhow, I read all the books I could, Dr. Dolittle and Tarzan. And I was 10 when my dream began. I'm going to grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. Everybody laughed. How can you do that? Don't have money. Anyway, you're just a girl. But my mother said, if you really want something like this, you'll have to take every opportunity, work really hard. If you don't give up, you may find a way. So no money for university. Left school, had to get a job, needed money. Just had enough for secretarial training, got a boring old job in London, letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya. Opportunity, yes. So worked as a waitress just around the corner here. Money couldn't save in London. So I was 23, which is about like a 16-year-old today, I suppose. Young girls didn't go off to foreign places like they do now. So while I stayed with my friend, I heard about somebody called Dr. Louis Leakey, who was a famous paleontologist. And somebody said, if you're interested in animals, you should go and meet Louis. So I went to meet him at the Natural History Museum. He took me around. He asked me lots of questions. And I think he was impressed how much I knew because I'd read every book I could read about animals in Africa. So he gave me a job, that boring old secretarial course. His secretary had left 2 days before I met him, and he needed a secretary. It was just like magic. And there I was, surrounded by people who could answer all the questions about the mammals and birds, etc. And I think, again, he was impressed by my passion. So he asked if I would try and study chimpanzees. I mean, out of all the animals, the one most like us, nobody had studied them.
Were you particularly in love with chimpanzees, or was that was just a coincidence?
This was a complete coincidence. I mean, I would have studied any animal to be out in the field with wild animals, and it just happened to be the one most like us. And of course, you know, what a difference that made, really.
So you end up then in Tanzania. That's when you got to Gombe the first time.
Yes, it took a year for him to get the money and everything. So the first day I set foot on Gombe was 14th of July, 1960. So we're coming up to the 60th anniversary of that long-term study. It's been unbroken except because of the pandemic and the danger of chimps getting COVID-19. We've just got a few people monitoring where they are and their health and things.
From that moment on, you stayed at Gombe with the chimpanzees. You started to study chimpanzees at that point in time, and you stayed there since that moment?
Well, I stayed there most of every year until 1968, which is when I left and began this crazy traveling around the world to try and do something to help chimps.
So you didn't have a degree?
No. And in fact, Louis wanted somebody who hadn't been to university because he said back then these scientists had a very reductionist way of thinking about our relationship with animals. They thought there was a difference of kind. We were completely separate. We were on this pinnacle. There was no bridge between us and the others. They didn't believe Darwin, obviously. But Louis Leakey wasn't like that. And of course, thanks to chimps being so like us, science is now thinking differently about our relationship with all the other animals.
Yeah, and I remember you became also very famous because you were not like following all the principles the scientists follow. You gave names to chimpanzees, and that's what kind of like unheard of for a scientist at the time to do so. I don't know if they do it today or not, but that was like very unique of you. And then you discovered that animals also use tools, and that basically changed how we think of science of animals as well, right?
Well, it changed everything for me because, you know, for the first months, the chimps ran away from me. And I was getting more and more worried because it was only money for 6 months. And, you know, I knew with time I could get the chimps' trust, but did I have time? And fortunately, one beloved chimpanzee, David Greybeard, lost his fear a little bit. And I could see him not only using grass stems to fish for termites, but actually stripping leaves, making tools. That brought in the National Geographic. They sent a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk. And so the scientists who had initially, why should we believe this young girl? She hasn't been to college. But when they saw Hugo's film, they had to believe. So.
And eventually you got a degree or not?
Leakey much later made me go to Cambridge University for a PhD, no undergraduate degree. And that's when I was told, A, I shouldn't have named the chimps. B, I couldn't talk about their personality. I couldn't talk about their mind capable of solving problems. And I couldn't talk about their emotions because those were unique to us. That's what they told me. But this little guy back here.
Jane shows a photograph taken in 1954 with Rusty, a black-coated dog that her parents gave her when she was 12 years old. For Jane, Rusty was the beginning of a special connection with animals that has grown stronger over the years.
It was thanks to him, you know, all through my childhood, he taught me that we were not the only beings with personalities, minds, and emotions. So I could stand up to the scientists.
Yeah, you experienced it by yourself. We can know from our dogs that they do have personalities, of course. How do you make chimps to trust you?
By being very patient, not trying to get too close too quickly, wearing the same sort of colored clothes, and just as I had done with the animals in my childhood, waiting patiently, calmly. And thanks to David, really, because if I approached a group ready to run and David was there, you could see them looking from this calm male chimpanzee to me and back. And I suppose they thought, well, she can't be so scary after all.
So we share, you mentioned this before, we share about 98% of their DNA, right, with chimps. And they're very similar to us in so many ways. Right? We're shocked to learn that they actually go to war against communities, against each other. And I didn't know that before. And even by the fact we know that we're so close to them and we're driving them to extinction. Shouldn't the fact that they're so similar to us make it easier for us to protect them?
Well, I'm not sure. It depends what we think about people. We're not so wonderful, are we? The biggest difference is the development of our intellect. But how come the most intellectual creature is destroying its only home? I think disconnect between head and heart, love and compassion. But, it was when I realized that chimp numbers were dropping across Africa and forests were going that I decided, well, I didn't know what to do, but I visited some of the range countries. And that's when I realized not only the problems facing the chimpanzees, the bushmeat hunting, being caught in snares, shooting mothers to sell the babies, all these different things. But I also learned about the problems faced by so many of the African people living in and around the forests. And so that's when JGI, Jane Goodall Institute, began our program to improve the lives of the people and help them find ways of making a livelihood without destroying the forest. Because if you're really poor and you've overused your land and your population has grown, you're going to cut down the last trees because you must feed your family. So now the trees that had gone all around Gombe are back again. And I think when you visited, you went along the shore of the lake, you probably saw some bare hills. Well, there aren't bare hills anymore. And we've got that program right through the chimp range in Tanzania now, 104 villages. And they've become our partners. They're helping us conserve. They've learned to use smartphones. They monitor the health of their village forest reserves, which is wonderful because that's where nearly all the Tanzanian chimps are. They're not protected.
I've seen you in the jungle. I know that you are the happiest when you're there near the chimps or in the jungle, like doing your walks. And how did it happen? Because I know that after some time, when you realized that chimps we were driving into extinction, we were basically cutting all the forest, all of these big problems. And I know you moved from spending your entire time at Gombe with chimpanzees in nature, your favorite place in the world, the happiest person ever, to traveling around for more than 300 days a year, sharing your message, trying to inspire people, educating people, inspire them to protect what we have left. So how did that happen? How did you basically learn about everything that was going on when you were like inside over there in Gombe with your chimps?
It was a big conference. In 1986, I helped put it together. And for the first time, it brought together the people by then studying chimpanzees in, I think it was 6 other parts of Africa, including the Japanese study just south of Gombe. And the main purpose was to see how does chimp behavior differ in different environments across Africa? Is there something like culture? Which there is. But at the same time, we had a session on conservation. And that's when people across Africa were showing slides telling us about the disappearance of the forest and chimpanzees being killed. And we also had a session on showing our closest relatives, very social, because yes, they go to war, but they're very caring and altruistic as well, like us both. And to see these amazing beings who can live for 60 years in 5-foot by 5-foot cages in medical research labs, it was such a shock, these two things. And I went to that conference, I had my PhD, I had a research station, I had the best life anybody could have who loves that sort of life. And I left as an activist. I didn't make the decision, Nicholas. It just happened. It was just, I have to try and do something, just like that.
And from that day on, you've been traveling around, spreading a message of hope that a lot of people have heard. And you have done a lot of activism ever since. I know you're very passionate about, as well as I am, the way we treat animals. And from my perspective, to me, animals are not different. We're not superior to animals. To me, they're just fellow earthlings we need to share this planet with. And the way our food supply system, the way we treat animals in this planet, how humanity is treating animals right now. In fact, COVID-19 happened precisely because of that, because of the way we are treating animals. That's where we're creating these viruses, which is not only COVID, but SARS and the mad cow diseases and so many others.
HIV/AIDS as well.
HIV/AIDS, exactly. But we don't seem to understand that. So what do you think about that?
Well, my perspective is that we have been warned about this by scientists studying zoonotic diseases for years and years and years. I know some of those scientists. We have disregarded it because, we want to go on doing what we've always done. We think we have the right to kill animals. Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we eat them? And people have actually said to me, well, if we're breeding pigs or cows for food, does it really matter how we treat them? Each of these animals, these pigs and these cows, they have a personality. They can feel happiness, sadness, fear, pain. The animals in the Asian meat markets, where SARS began, where the COVID-19 began, they're animals trafficked from different parts of the continent or the world and sold, and it's unhygienic as well as horribly cruel. And they're slaughtered on the spot, so the seller and the buyer can get contaminated with urine, blood, feces, and so on. So a virus jumped from an animal into a woman in this Wuhan market, and it bound itself with some cell in her body and created a new disease. Doesn't always, but this one did. And that turned out to be a very contagious disease, so it whizzed all around the world. And it's cost us economic chaos as well as suffering, misery, pain to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And, so it's not just the cruelty to animals, both in the wild meat markets and in the intensive farms, in the bush meat markets of Africa, which is where HIV/AIDS began with chimpanzee meat. But it's also the destruction of the forests, pushing animals closer together, pushing them in contact with people, hunters going deeper into the forest with roads, having contact with animals that previously hasn't happened. Well, there's millions more viruses and bacteria out there. And unless we change and show more respect, we're going to get more diseases. And imagine this one, it's very contagious, but the percentage of people who catch it, who die, is relatively small. Yes. Imagine if the next one is like Ebola, very contagious like this one, but very high death rate like Ebola. That's waiting to happen. And, the interesting thing is we'll get through this pandemic, but we'll be then face to face with an even more serious crisis. And that's climate change, which has come about for exactly the same reason, the disrespect of the natural world.
Yes, I know. And sometimes people think that these viruses are being generated and bred in Chinese markets because of these wild animals, that we're treating them very badly there. But this happens in our backyards, here in Latin America, in the United States, in Europe, everywhere. Factory farming. We kill 60 billion animals every single year, and we confine them in places that are just, if people I don't remember who said that, but if slaughterhouses had glass walls, people wouldn't be eating animals. So the way we treat animals here in our own countries, it's also a ground for these viruses to spread and to be created, and can be very deadly.
Yeah, it's happened. It actually has happened that we've had diseases that spill over from factory farmed animals. And one, the swine fever, that started when fruit bats were driven into the cultivated fields because their forests had been cut down. And they were feeding on fruit above commercially farmed pigs. And it was the pigs being contaminated by the bats that gave swine fever to people. So it's the way we mistreat animals is responsible for so much.
It's kind of like what's happening to animals and what we're doing to animals, to me, is an indicator of what we're doing to the planet in general. Our lives depend on a healthy planet. And I don't think we're going to destroy the planet. We're just going to destroy the conditions that humans need to live on this planet. But eventually the planet will regrow into something new without humans. But we're connected to the planet. Everything is interconnected. We depend on each other. How can we connect back
to nature so that our lives are more in balance?
At least understand it, because if you don't understand, you don't care. If you don't care, you don't help. But that's exactly why, or one of the reasons that I began the Roots and Shoots program, because so many children are separated from nature, either because they're always on social media and video games and things, but many of them in the cities, they don't have a chance to have anything to do with the natural world. And so that's absolutely key, helping young children become involved with nature. And if they can't go out into real nature, then city parks or even gardens, anything, as I did as a child. You can watch a spider jumping through the grass with little babies on her back, or you can watch, how an egg hatches if you're very quiet, and the baby bird comes out and gets fed by the parents. I mean, all this was so exciting to me as a child. And through Roots and Shoots, we hope to bring back that connection. And when people are connected with nature, or even if they understand the connection that you just mentioned, it's the trouble is we've got caught up in a materialistic way of thinking. And we're counting success only as accumulation of a lot of stuff and money. And that doesn't necessarily make people happy. A successful life is somebody who's created perhaps a home, if they want a home for a family, can educate their children and have time to be with the family, have time to be in nature. Not this rat race where people are always rushing to get more money or to keep the jobs they have because the competition gets greater. And, we must not forget a fact which people don't want to talk about. We have to. Right now, there's approximately 7.2 billion humans on the planet. Yep. And already in some places, we're using up more finite natural resources than the planet can replace. In 2050, it's estimated there'll be almost 10 billion. So what is going to happen? I can't answer that. But we do have to consider it when we think about how can we live in harmony with nature. Some of it will be technology. More and more technology is helping us to live in harmony. We also can use our brains to think about our own ecological footprint. Like Roots and Shoots, every day you live, you make some impact on the planet. And unless you're living in deep poverty, you have a choice as to what kind of impact you make.
Well, I've been witness to your Roots and Shoots program. I remember in Africa, and I was amazed by it. I saw little kids actually telling me about the name of the plants and telling me about which plant could cure a snake bite, for example, things that not even their parents knew. And I was mesmerized by it because they knew how to grow coffee and they knew the plants and they knew how to make medicines out of the plants. And I'm talking about, I don't know, maybe 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And to me, that was amazing. Of course, gave me a lot of hope. But what you were mentioning about, there's this number that I've been following, and it's called the Earth Overshoot Day. It's the day that they measure this day when we consume the resources that the planet can replenish sustainable. And that day, when they started measuring, it was like August the 13th or something. Today is June 19 or something like that. That means that by June 19th, we already consume all the resources that the planet can replenish in a sustainable way. The rest of the year, we're just consuming extra. We're just taking away from our kids, from our children, from future generations. So it's like everybody's taking out of this money account, but nobody is putting any money into it. And eventually it's going to run out. So what's your perspective regarding our current leadership of the planet and the fact that they're just basically removing every regulations that have taken years of work, decades of work?
I feel exactly the same way as you do. And that's why I'm spending so much energy on developing Roots and Shoots, because already, as it began in 91, we have adults out in responsible positions who went through the Roots and Shoots program. And amazingly, they retain the values that they learned during Roots and Shoots. And Roots and Shoots is, we don't tell them what to do. We can advise them. But basically, we choose to do things that they're passionate about. For example, the environment minister in Tanzania went through Roots and Shoots and had the courage to stand up to a president who doesn't care two hoots about the natural world. He lost his job, but he stood up to him. And so I think, more and more young people moving into responsible positions, becoming parents, becoming teachers, going into government, going into business. But do we have time? I mean, the window of time for healing the harm we've inflicted is not huge. I know it's not huge. But, we just have to go on fighting harder and harder and harder. People say, how do you keep going? Because I'm an obstinate so-and-so and I'm not going to give in.
My next question is related to that, because when I see the world today, I mean, we have basically eliminated 50% of wildlife during my lifetime. 50% of coral reefs are gone. We have lost 80% of the forests. We are initiating the sixth mass extinction, the first one ever in 4.5 billion years that the planet has, that is being led by one single species, and that's us, which to me, that's absolutely crazy. Pollution is rampant. Fracking now is all over the place. People don't seem to understand that. We are in an ecological crisis. We are in a climate crisis. And to me, this pandemic is kind of like a very lovely way of the planet telling us, hey, humans, wake up. And I think it's doing it in a very lovely way, because the climate crisis is going to be so much worse than this is, to me. So how do you keep hope?
Well, because I have to. I couldn't live if I didn't. I mean, if you don't have hope, you do nothing. And if you don't have hope, what's the point of, if you honestly think everything you do can't make any difference, why do you go on trying? So I tell the young people, because they get very depressed, the roots and shoots, the university students, and I say, well, do what you can every day. That makes you feel good. If you actually are doing something and you see the result of what you're doing, you see you've made a difference, and you know that around the world other people are fighting and making a difference, that gives you the courage to go on. Together we can. So, I tell them, your time will come. Just go on doing what you can. And even if it's too late, even if the world is destroyed, isn't it better to carry on with hope and fighting for what you know is right? And, we don't, this pandemic, I said earlier on, it might have the death rate of Ebola. And think back to the Black Death that killed about half of Europe. Something like that might happen. We might be hit by a meteor. We don't know the future. We cannot predict. So we have to go on trying to make things better, because we don't know what the future actually holds for us. We just don't know.
You always inspire people in the message of hope. And actually, I have a little story to tell everyone that is listening here, because I'm very grateful to Jane for that. One of my earliest conversations with Jane was about, I wasn't hopeful at all about the state of the planet. I was very sad, disappointed, depressed. And I don't know if you remember this, Jane, but we were talking about, the conversation about kids came on because I asked you, I'm not going to have any children because I don't think the planet is going to make it and we're not going to survive. And I don't want to bring children into this world that is so dark and so doom. And I remember the words that you told me that day. If you don't want to have a kid because you don't have hope, you're wrong. Because it's okay that you don't want to have a kid. But if it is because you don't have hope, it's wrong. Because if you don't have hope, life is not worth living. You have to do everything in your hands to have a good impact on the planet. And that changed my perspective a lot. So much that now I have a kid. His name is Kai. He's 2 years and a half. And I'm completely in love with him. And I'm praying that he comes up to be a warrior for the planet and for the animals and for the causes that I care about. So I always share this story because I found that your message, that conversation really, really had an impact on me so much that now I have a kid. So there's reason for hope. So one thing that everyone is asking all the time is tell us the story about Mr. H, that little, that I know is, you have him there somewhere.
I have him here, but I have to get him.
At this point, Jane gets up and brings Mr. H, a little stuffed chimpanzee holding a banana. Jane has taken Mr. H to conferences in over 60 countries and became one of the symbols of her fight to save the Earth.
So here he is. Here's Mr. H. Yes, there he is. He's very famous, 29 years old now. And he's actually my fourth reason for hope. The first is the youth. Because, when they're understanding the problems and empowered to take action, it's unbelievable what they're doing to change the world. I mean, right now as we're talking, they're working away on different projects. The second reason is this brain. We're coming up with amazing technology with solar and wind and all sorts of other things which are on, being tested right now. Thirdly, it's nature's so resilient. So places that we have destroyed, give it a chance. Like all around Gombe, it was completely bare hills. Now the trees are back. Animals, elephants at one point were nearly extinct, and now they're not nearly extinct anymore. Then finally, there's what I call the indomitable human spirit. That's the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up. And there are people like Nelson Mandela, who, along with de Klerk, lifted South Africa out of the evil regime of apartheid, which nobody thought was possible back then. And then I meet so many disabled people who, I don't know, so many people would give up if they were disabled like that. And Mr. H was given to me by a man called Gary Horn, which is why he's Mr. H. And Gary went blind when he was 21 in the US Marines, actually, and decided for some odd reason to be a magician. Everybody said, but Gary, you can't be a magician, you're blind. Well, kids don't know he's blind.
The children only noticed that Gary was blind until the end of the show. At that time, he told them that in addition of being a magician, he also practiced golf, judo, and karate. When he gave Mr. H, he said to Jane, "Take it wherever you go, and then you will know that my spirit is with you." Gary's message is simple. Don't give up when something bad happens in your life. If you work hard, you can overcome most obstacles.
I met another man, another hero of mine. He's called Chris Koch. He's Canadian. And he was born with no arms and legs. And he had 4 older siblings. And his parents, they were wonderful. They just treated him like the others. So he learned to get around in his own way. And he goes around on a skateboard. He's got one little flipper thing coming out of a thigh. And he's got 2 little stumps, they're no bigger than that, from each shoulder, and they're thin, sort of like my wrists. And with those 2 little stumps, he can get a cell phone out of his pocket, he can dial on it. He is completely amazing. And I said to him the last time I met him, "Chris, haven't people offered you prosthetic limbs?" And he said, "Yes, they have, but I think perhaps I was put together this way for a reason, so I think I'll stay the way I am." And then he said, "Actually, I might take them up on prosthetic legs when I climb Everest."
Oh my God.
Yes, that isn't an indomitable spirit. I don't know what is.
I don't know what it is. I agree with you. Jane, thank you very much again. This has been lovely to me. To have another opportunity to talk to you is always amazing. I hope we can do so in person very, very soon. I miss a lot our conversations and I cherish them with me. I treasure them. So what would be your last words for everyone that is listening, to the kids of Latin America specifically? What can they do? How can they keep hope up and continue their fight?
I think they've already heard that. I've said it, but I'll say it again. That each one of us makes an impact every single day. And when everybody makes ethical choices, we get a very different world. But may I end with a story? Do I have time to tell a quick story?
Of course. You have all the time in the world. I'm just being respectful of your time.
Then I tell 2 different stories, both very short. One is a little girl, Roots and Shoots, in South Africa. And she couldn't get a group going in her school. So she thought, well, I'll do something by myself. And her mother was best friends with a woman who ran a shelter for stray dogs. So many stray dogs in Joburg that they were compelled to euthanize them. And if they hadn't been given homes or found homes in 2 weeks, they were euthanized. So she knew about this. So this child, she was only 11. And on the day when the dogs were euthanized, she got up at 4 a.m. and went to the shelter so that she could give every single dog who was going to be killed 10 minutes of love before it was euthanized. And I think for a child of 11 to have the strength to do that is something quite extraordinary. And then the second story, it's very symbolic. It's a Roots and Shoots symbolism story. And it was the first group that was formed in Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. And they were children 9 to 12, something like that. And for their project, they wanted to go to this hill and put the trees back on it because they were told it was once a sacred hill and it was bare. So there's always fighting in this part of DRC, opposite Gombe, Goma. And their coordinator, he said, well, I have to get permission for this. He knew they couldn't do it. The hill was much bigger than they thought. But he went to the commanding officer of the rebel force that happened to be there at the time, who said, oh, well, it's stupid, but if that's what you want, all right, but I'll have to send soldiers with you. So you imagine 15 little children clasping a little sapling, much further than they thought. And there are 4 big Congolese soldiers with AK-47s over their shoulder. And they arrived at this hill, and I think the children realized it was hopeless, but they were going to plant their trees anyway. Well, one little girl, the youngest, the ground was hard and it was hot, and she couldn't dig the hole, and she began to cry. So after 10 minutes, one of the soldiers leaned his gun against a tree and went to help her. And within the next 15 minutes, all the soldiers had laid down their guns and were helping the children to plant trees. Wow. And I just think that is so symbolic. So it's never too late to change someone. It's never too late to change. And that's what we're all about, making change. Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me. And I've loved talking to you, Nicholas. So until next time.
This interview was recorded on June 26 of 2020. Special thanks to the Jane Goodall Institute, Susana Name, Joana Riquet, and Manuela Mejia. Elemental is a co-production by the team from La No Ficción, Excel Content Studios, and Nicolas Ibargüen. The interview was edited by Juan Camilo Hernández and Miguel Reyes. Mixing and sound design were done by Valentina Fonseca and Daniel Diaz. The introductory and closing song is by Manuela Mejia, and the handpan performance is by Felipe Ibargüen. If you have comments or suggestions, please write to us on our Instagram at Podcast Elemental. If you enjoy our work, help us to spread the word by recommending it to friends or family who may find it useful or interesting. Don't forget to click the follow button and the notification bell for the Elemental Show to stay updated on new episodes.